Today, I'm moving the US men's national team to the Premier League in England to find out if they are the real deal or if we are the most overrated national team in the world. I created a custom team and picked my 25-man roster to compete in the Premier League. To make things more difficult, I removed one of the worst teams in the league, Burnley, to make room for the US of A in the top division. There goes 6 of the easier points. Sorry, JJ. Now, we're going to simulate into the future and find out how they get on. Some of the results are pretty surprising, so make sure to stick around to the end to see who caused a shock. We're going to go through 4 different seasons. One coached by current manager Gregg Berhalter, the second season managed by Marsch, who many US men's national team fans have wanted to see at the helm for 2026, the third season coached by the consensus best manager in the world, Pep Guardiola, and finally, I will try and steer them to the Premier League title, or safety from relegation, which may be the same thing depending on how all of this goes down. At the end of the 4 comparable seasons, I'll show you the underlying statistics from each manager to determine just how good the US men's national team actually are and who should be coaching them. I began to make this video because I thought it would just be some fun exercise to do, but what it turned into was a mind-bending exercise into the unique and innovative ways that the US could actually line up. I hope you all enjoy reviewing the results as much as I did making this video, because I'll tell you right now, it does not end with just me being the coach of the US national team. I became obsessive with this project, falling into a crazy rabbit hole. But let's start at the beginning. Gregg Berhalter did not bring this team to glory. He ended up in 19th place. Now, Gregg lined this team up in a 4-3-3 with Tyler Adams as the lone defensive midfielder. But the way he was playing was to play short passes that were safe and didn't really go forward very much. Now, this is a tale as old as time now with Gregg as our coach, and I want to be fair to him because he's going to get rocked in the comments. I can only see it now. He is not here to defend himself, and we are going through a simulation. But what the simulation believes is that Gregg Berhalter would play this way. He would play with a short passing. His teams did do well in terms of possession, but they did not score enough goals. And what really killed them is they let in way too many. His teams had physical attributes and won a lot of offensive and defensive duels, but they didn't get the results that they needed. Not only did they get relegated from the Premier League, they also lost in the 3rd round of the FA Cup by Plymouth Argyle 4-2. His biggest wins were 3-1 over Fulham and 2-0 over Everton, but there were not many wins to pick from. One constant across the board, and I'll talk more about this when I manage the team, is that the US national team, their starting 11, is probably worthy of a mid-table finish in the Premier League, but the depth is really where we have a problem, because once you get into substitutes or injuries, it gets really, really difficult to figure out what to do in the game. If you need to lock down the game and you're winning, it's really tough when Johnny or Luca De La Torre are your impact midfielders. And when you're chasing a goal, it's really difficult when your only options are someone like Brenden Aaronson and Timothy Weah. I don't think it's all Gregg's fault here. We'll see how the personnel has their own problems. But at the same time, I will tell you right now, this is one of the worst seasons that any coaches throughout this experiment have. Shoo! All right, first season, first relegation. I hope all of the rest of us have much better luck than Triple G. Let's see how another American coach fared. Marsch was able to do what his countrymen could not in Gregg Berhalter, and that was keep the US men's national team in the Premier League. His team finished in 16th place. I thought it was pretty hilarious what the simulation did because it looked very similar to what Leeds United was doing last year. Marsch's team was last in possession and last in pass completion, but he was very high in final third duels won. He is one of the only coaches in the entirety of this simulation that plays this team with a narrow focus, so he played in a 4-2-3-1, but the 3 attacking midfielders didn't really play out wide as wingers. They were really condensed into the center of the pitch as attacking midfielders. He's also one of the only coaches that used Joe Scally as their right back. Now, everyone's going to think that Serginho Dest is the natural player here in the right back position, but this is where things got really interesting because a lot of the other coaches did not, and it wasn't just Joe Scally or Serginho Dest. And when I actually looked at what was happening, it made a lot of sense. For Marsch though, he had Balogun up top with Pooley, Reina, and Weah as their front four. It didn't really work, but it worked well enough to stay in the league. That's about as good as you would expect from the US men's national team paired with Jesse Marsch in the Premier League. Now I was thinking to myself, what would happen if we brought in a world-renowned manager, an elite manager that everyone thinks as the best in the world? So next up is that man, Pep Guardiola. Now, most people would expect looking at this starting 11 to be mid-table, but again, like I said, the depth and the injuries really crushed me, at least when I was managing this team. And Pep was able to do what I thought was unthinkable at this point in the experiment, and that was bring the team to 11th place. Now, as I mentioned, this is where things got really interesting because Pep Guardiola's starting preferred formation was a 4-3-3 with what looked like Chris Richards as the right back. But as I got further and further into the detail of his game plan, looking at the heat maps of the games that were being played by Pep Guardiola's team, it was actually Chris Richards playing as a right back and moving into the center of the field, much like Zinchenko does for Arsenal or John Stones does for Man City. Pep loves to use center backs as outside backs and move them into the center of the pitch for stability, and if they're good with their feet, that's an added bonus for him. And I thought this was crazy because Football Manager does not track what is happening in real life. In real life, you'll notice that Chris Richards for Crystal Palace has played as a center defensive midfielder over the last few games for Roy Hodgson. So the digital version of Pep Guardiola saw Chris Richards as a player that could start as a right back and move into the center of the pitch to support the attack. And what his teams actually looked like when they had the ball was a 3-2-2-3. Something else that really surprised me with Pep is that he was one of the only coaches that preferred Ricardo Pepi over Fuller and Balogun. Here's where the wormhole starts though, because I look at what Pep was doing and I start to get curious about what other managers across the world would do with the US men's national team. And if you know me, it is dangerous when I get curious. But before I saw what weird and wacky ways the rest of the world would set up the US, I needed to take the reins and see if I could beat out Gregg Berhalter's record of 19th place. The way that I set up my team was in a 4-3-3. But the way that I wanted my team to play was somewhat of an evolved way of Klopp's high press. I knew that I had good physical players and players that could play behind the lines like Fuller and Balogun and Christian Pulisic, so I wanted to play a bit of a direct style. This also allowed me to hold the ball and create chances against teams that were worse than me and be flexible with my play and play a little bit more defensively and compactly against teams that were better. I used Christian Pulisic and Giovanni Reina as inside forwards, similar to how in the early 2020s, Liverpool was using Sadio Mane and Mo Salah. One thing for me that was really difficult, and I mentioned this for all of the other coaches as well, is that as soon as you have an injury or you need a substitute to make an impact on the field, whether you're winning and you're looking to close out the game or whether you're chasing the game and you need someone to score a goal, other than Fuller and Balogun and Ricardo Pepi, there is such a huge drop-off in almost every other position. Knowing that in certain situations I needed to put Johnny in for Tyler Adams, it did not feel good. And although I finished in a really nice position, something that I was proud of, I could not get it out of my head what Pep Guardiola had done with this US team. His 3-2-2-3 was set up in such a way that I never would have thought of that if I didn't see it in Football Manager. So I started to think, how else could this US team be set up, and how would some of the other best managers in the world see this team? Tactics and formations that we would never think of, but when you actually see it on paper, seem to fit this team perfectly. I went searching. And Pep was just the beginning. All of the best managers in Europe, any name that you can think of that's off the top of your head, I tried to do a simulation with this team, all in the pursuit of trying to get this squad qualified for a Champions League or win one of the in-season tournaments. I started with Ange Postecoglou and Unai Emery. They didn't really do anything crazy innovative, and they also didn't finish in ways that I thought they could with this team. Next up was Jurgen Klopp. He showed a lot of promise in the season, and his teams did find a unique way to set up. He was playing in a high press 4-3-3 false 9. His team finished in 12th place. So after not finding a ton of success with those three managers, I decided to look inward again and go for the best American managers that aren't named Gregg Berhalter or Jesse Marsch, starting with Steve Cherundolo. Steve Cherundolo was a bit of a dud for me. I mean, not the way he finished 13th is definitely something to be proud of with this team, but he didn't really show any promise in finding unique ways to set this team up. It was still a base level 4-3-3. Then I thought to myself, there is an American coaching in one of Europe's top 5 leagues who has his team chasing Europe right now, and that is Pellegrino Matarazzo with Hoffenheim. The results with Matarazzo were incredible. The best one yet. Matarazzo with this team finished in 8th place, only 3 points off the European qualification spots. He used a 5-2-1-2 formation with Pulisic and Balogun as the front two. Having 2 attackers that could get in behind the lines on a counterattack, having 3 really solid defenders, and actually using your wingbacks as attacking options while staying compact without the ball seemed to work wonders for this team. Okay, we had finally gotten somewhere. Someone had broken into the top 10 of the Premier League, and it was an American coach, Pellegrino Matarazzo. The list doesn't stop there because there were other names that had been discussed when the US had a vacancy for their head coach. One of them was Jose Mourinho. I had high hopes going into this, but Jose Mourinho was able to equal Pep Guardiola. He also played with a 3/5 in the back, and his evolution was using Weston McKennie as a right wing back, which we know he's played a little bit for Juventus. Next up was the most interesting and hottest coach in the Premier League, Roberto De Zerbi. De Zerbi was kind of hilarious because he didn't finish very high in the table. He almost got relegated. But the way that he played, and one result in particular I just thought was very Roberto De Zerbi-esque. He played in a 4-2-4, essentially an all-out attack with 4 across the front line. And this did work one time when he won a game 10-3 against Aston Villa. But at this point, I was running the experiment to the bone. There were only so few names left to try. And at this point, I'm just stuck thinking, if those names were not able to get the US national team into Europe, who else is out there that could actually do this? Well, one name, again in the Bundesliga, I went searching for, Xabi Alonso, who currently has Bayer Leverkusen undefeated in the Bundesliga at the top of the table, but he just didn't have what it took for the US national team. He also set his team up in a 5-3-2, and if I'm taking anything from this experiment, it's that the US does need to investigate how they will play if they want to play in a 3 or 5 at the back, because we do have the personnel to do it, but we're kind of running out of time with Copa America next summer, and before you know it, the World Cup is going to be upon us. The names were running out. I went back to the classics. Diego Simeone, who a lot of people have said would probably be the best fit for the US, was the only other manager in this experiment to be relegated. I was back to the drawing board. And if you don't know, doing one of these simulations takes like 2 hours of real life time. And I was just becoming hopeless that if any of these managers couldn't do it, then I wouldn't be able to find anyone that could. I was thinking back on the Premier League and any of the coaches or managers that I had missed. And one that looked obvious to me when I saw it, but I didn't think of it before, was Mikel Arteta. No matter how you feel about the current Arsenal team and Mikel Arteta, you can't really deny the results have been really, really good. So what could Mikel Arteta do with the US national team? A team that I think mirrors Arsenal really nicely. Arteta was able to qualify for the UEFA Conference League with an insane record of 17 wins, 12 draws, and 9 losses. An incredible, incredible record with this team, only 3 points off the Europa League spot. Now he played very similar to Pep Guardiola. A 4-3-3, which turned into something different when he was in possession. Now for him, I love this because when we see Gregg Berhalter playing with this team in real life, the US men's national team's strength comes from its fullbacks and its midfield. What Mikel Arteta did was use the right back and the left back as essentially inside defensive midfielders. So the way that his team set up was now a 2-3-2-3. I had just spent days, trying to find a coach that could qualify the US for Europe and do it with an innovative style. Thank you to Mikel Arteta for actually doing it. I started this experiment thinking it would just be fun to see what would happen if I put some of these managers in charge of the US national team and pitted them in the most competitive league in the world. But what ended up happening is that I have a newfound appreciation for trying to find different and unique ways to set this team up. Using Chris Richards as a center defensive midfielder wasn't something that just happened in the virtual world because Pep Guardiola thought of it. It is happening in the real world right now with Crystal Palace and Roy Hodgson. It makes so much sense, and it just took a virtual version of Pep Guardiola to think of it and how it would fit into the US national team. I had so much fun making this video, and if you can't tell, I put way too much effort into making it look good because I loved doing this, and I thought it was so interesting and intriguing to actually go through the simulations, but I also wanted to make it fun for you to watch it. So I really hope you have enjoyed it. And if you do want to do this experiment, you can create a club in Football Manager 24, put all of the US into one club, and try and beat Mikel Arteta's record of 7th place. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. I love you, and I'll see you next time on It's Called Soccer. Peace.